Apple's budget MacBook, the MacBook Neo, is here. Yeah, I know, Neo? Why Neo? Why just not MacBook? Well, I don't know, but it is actually a really cool product and an incredibly good value. And if you're thinking of picking one up, here are 18 things you should know before. First off, since this is a budget MacBook, the most important spec is its actual price, which is just $599. This makes it almost half the price of the new MacBook Air, and actually the same price as the Mac Mini, whilst coming with a display, keyboard, trackpad, and battery. Now, the second thing you should know is that Apple had to make many trade-offs to reach this price, one of them being the chip, as the MacBook Neo is actually powered by an iPhone chip, just like in the rumors, the A18 Pro from the iPhone 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max, but with one less GPU core actually, for a total of 5 instead of 6. It still has 6 CPU cores, 2 high performance and 4 efficiency cores. So if it's running an iPhone chip, it's probably not going to be very fast, right? Well, wrong. The A18 Pro actually has a single core performance similar to the M3 and the multi-core performance on par with the M1. And for the vast majority of users, especially those looking for an entry-level MacBook, that's actually more than enough performance. However, we sadly only get 8 GB of RAM with no options to upgrade, which is fine for emailing, browsing the web, or maybe working on a keynote presentation, but for anything more than that, as well as for future-proofing, 8 GB is definitely not enough. Also, the memory bandwidth is lower as well at only 60 GB per second, as opposed to 68 GB per second like the M1, 120 on the M4, and 153 on the M5. So pretty big difference here. The good news is that the A18 Pro does include an AV1 decoder and also hardware accelerated ray tracing, just like the M3 and newer chips. So even on paper, this kind of looks like the M1, it's more like the M3 under the hood. At number 4, we have the design, which despite the price is actually quite premium and fully made out of aluminium. It's quite similar to the MacBook Air, although it is a bit smaller. And interestingly enough, it is also a bit thicker, measuring in at 1.27 centimeters as opposed to 1.13. But still thinner than a MacBook Pro, which comes in at 1.55. The weight is also identical to the MacBook Air at 1.23 kilograms, which again surprised me. I was sure that this would be a much lighter device, maybe as light as the 12-inch MacBook, that was actually only 900 grams. And this is also the very first MacBook to come in some brand new vibrant colors. So it comes in silver, blush, citrus, and indigo. And I really love these, as the keyboard is also color matched. I think it looks beautiful. And I think the Neo is so well made for students and younger audiences who want a bit more fun and more appeal out of their MacBooks. And I gotta say, we've actually matched our brand new wallpapers to match the colors of the new MacBook Neo. And we've got so many new amazing new packs that we've just launched that will look incredible no matter which device you use them on. So you can check out wallpapers by using the links below. The sixth thing you should know is some display downgrades. The display on paper looks like a pretty good display, much better than the price would suggest, but like I said, it does have some downgrades. For example, it is smaller than the Air's 13.6-inch display. This is only 13 inches. It also has a slightly lower resolution than the MacBook Air, but surprisingly, it maxes out at 500 nits of brightness, just like the MacBook Air. However, it doesn't have a notch, but I honestly don't mind that. I just hate the notch on the MacBooks as it just gets in the way of my menu bar status icons, and I've got loads of them. Now, the downside of not having the notch here is that the bezels are thicker than the MacBook Air's bezels, which were in turn thicker than the MacBook Pro's bezels. And also, it doesn't support the P3 color gamut, only sRGB, so that means it has worse color accuracy. And it also lacks True Tone, which, I have to be honest, I don't really mind, as I'd usually keep it disabled for any photo or video work. But then again, the accuracy is lower anyways, so you're probably not gonna edit any photos or videos on this anyways. Then at number 7, we have the battery of this new MacBook, which lasts up to 16 hours, only 2 hours less than the MacBook Air. And for the price, that's an amazing battery life. I've got no complaints here. But fun fact, the battery size itself is only 36.5 watt hours, as opposed to the MacBook Air's 53.8. In fact, this MacBook's battery is even smaller than the 13-inch iPad Pro's battery. That's around 38 watt hours. This is likely something that Apple did on purpose to reduce the costs and still make the Air look superior, as otherwise, the A18 Pro chip paired with the same battery as the MacBook Air would have likely given us about a 24-hour or so battery life. Speaking of the battery, it actually comes with a 20-watt charger included in the box. 20 watt. Yeah, that would be considered a slow charger even for a phone. Probably because there is no fast charging here in this MacBook at all. Plus, it also comes with a 1.5 meter USB-C cable. I'm pretty sure that all the cables that ship with MacBooks, either USB-C or MagSafe, are always 2 meters in length, so it's quite interesting that they're also cutting costs here. Now, the bad news is that if you purchase this MacBook outside of the US, you don't actually get the charger in the box, you just get the cable. But either way, you can probably find a compatible 20-watt charger anywhere for pretty cheap. Link down below to a pretty good Amazon one, by the way. At number 10, I initially thought that this side grill was an SD card slot, but no, it turns out that these are actually the speakers. So the MacBook Neo has 2 side-firing speakers, which may also sound better than the MacBook Airs under the keyboard speaker. We'll definitely be testing that out. They also support Dolby Atmos, so yeah, I cannot wait to actually try these in person. It's also got a 2 microphone array as opposed to 3 on the Air and the MacBook Pro. At number 11, the FaceTime camera is also 1080p just like the MacBook Airs and the MacBook Pros, but it lacks center stage and desk view functionality, which again, for the price, I don't really mind. Then the 12th thing you should know is when it comes to the ports. Unfortunately, we do not have MagSafe at all. And we only have 2 USB-C ports. One that's USB 3, and the other that's actually USB 2. USB 2 in 2026. That one just has 480 megabits per second transfer speeds, or 60 megabytes per second as opposed to 10 gigabits per second of the USB-C 3 port, or 1.25 gigabytes per second. In fact, that USB 2.0 port doesn't even support video out either, as only the faster one does. So that's basically just for charging. I find it crazy that Apple said this back in the day.
So they'll have ports on there, maybe a USB 3 port, a USB 2 port, color code them so you can tell the difference. That's not how we do it. So here's the MacBook Air. As you know, the MacBook Air has a port on each side. Our customers like that. And we're going to have USB 3 as well as USB 2 support, so you don't have to think about it. You just use whatever port you want.
Yet now they're giving us something even worse than what the Windows laptops were doing more than a decade ago, as you can't even tell which port you need to use for external display support, speaking of which, it only supports a single 4K 60Hz monitor. Now, I already knew that we wouldn't be getting Thunderbolt here like the MacBook Air and the Pro, as the A18 Pro chip does not have a Thunderbolt controller, but I was at least hoping that both ports would support USB 3.0 speeds. Oh, and there's also a headphone jack, but it doesn't support high impedance headphones, so your headphones may sound a bit quieter here. At number 13, we have the storage, and there are 2 tiers here. The entry-level 256GB model for $599, and if you want the 512, that's an extra $100, which I think is pretty fair. Apple actually used to charge $200 for an extra 256GB up until a few days ago. Also, I think that this is the least configurable Mac ever. It literally only has 2 XQs, and I'm pretty sure that the base model will likely have some pretty slow storage speeds as well. And speaking of storage, the MacBook Neo also comes with TouchID, but only if you opt for the upgraded 512GB of storage model. The 256 version only comes with a basic lock/wake button, which means that you'll have to type in your password every single time, even for Apple Pay purchases. And this keyboard sadly is not backlit. This is the first MacBook in over 16 years that doesn't have this, and I'm quite disappointed. And since it doesn't have a backlit keyboard, it also lacks the ambient light sensor, which is another disadvantage, which means that you'll have to adjust the screen brightness manually. But really, I think one of the biggest downsides is not having a Force Touch trackpad. Yeah, the one that was introduced with a 12-inch MacBook back in 2015 that vibrates to simulate a click and offer consistent clicks anywhere on its surface. Yeah, that one is nowhere to be found. Instead, we only have a basic multi-touch hinged trackpad. I'm hoping that this is the same one as on the M1 and M2 iPad Pro's Magic Keyboard, which did actually click uniformly all the way down, as opposed to a diving board mechanism like back in the day. At number 17, we have, interestingly enough, the latest Bluetooth 6.0 standard. I think it's the only Apple product that comes with Bluetooth 6, but without the N1 chip. Oddly enough, the $1,700 base M5 MacBook Pro only comes with Bluetooth 5.3, which is really weird. But anyway, we also get a Wi-Fi 6E on this MacBook Neo, which I think is totally fine for the price. So, should you get one? Well, in a vacuum, the MacBook Neo is an amazing deal. But as soon as you start looking at the refurbished MacBook Air models, I think its appeal quickly drops, as it just has too many downsides. Look, an official Apple refurbished M4 MacBook Air costs $750, and that's a better laptop in every single way for only $150 extra. Or You can even buy a refurbished M2 or M3 MacBook Air off of Amazon for an even lower cost. Link for those down below, by the way. But then again, I know a ton of people who don't like buying refurbished or used MacBooks, and they only want to buy something that's new. So for those people, I think this is an amazing deal. And if you're a student, you also get a $100 discount, making this brand new MacBook a $500 MacBook. And that's just such an incredible deal for a Mac. But either way, let me know down below if you will be getting this new MacBook Neo and in which color as well. We should have one in the studio pretty soon, and I will be posting a full review once I actually get to, use it properly as my daily MacBook. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, I'm Daniel, this is ZONEofTECH, and I'll see you guys in the next one. ZONEofTECH, signing out.